Well, good afternoon and good evening, everyone. My name is Naomi Goldberg, and I'm Deputy Director of the Movement Advancement Project. I'm also a lesbian mom raising a 10-year-old with my wife in Ann Arbor. It's about bedtime here, so you may see my little person come through. But I'm so excited to be here with you all tonight. A few housekeeping notes before we start. You can view captions for this webinar by hitting the Show Captions button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We are recording tonight's webinar and we'll send a link around to everyone who registered. We'll also be posting some resources in the chat tonight and we'll share those with you via email as well. And we're going to take questions at the end. I'm sure there are a lot of questions and we did receive some when people registered. So please use the Q&A feature in Zoom to post your questions. So as I said, I am as excited as you probably are to spend the next hour or so with this all-star team of advocates from LGBTQ family organization Family Equality, COLAGE representing children with LGBTQ parents, GLBTQ legal advocates and defenders or GLAD, and the National Center for Lesbian Rights, NCLR. I think these people are so inspiring and this is truly a dream team of experts. I'll be moderating tonight. So again, use the Q&A feature as you have questions as we go along, and I'll keep track of those for our speakers afterward. Now, let me hand it over to Jordan Budd from COLAGE.
Hi, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with you all tonight and alongside so many fabulous organizations working to safeguard our families and communities. As you may know, nearly 500 anti-LGBTQ bills were filed across the country this year, and we just marked the 1-year anniversary of the Dobbs decision. It also happens to be the 1-year anniversary, the 8-year anniversary today of marriage equality in Massachusetts. Justice Thomas's concurrence was a reminder to us all that the fight to recognize our families is not over. In several cases just this past year, we've seen parental rights stripped from non-gestational LGBTQ parents, and in some cases given to gamete providers. This report, our FAQ for LGBTQ families in response to the Dobbs decision, and this town hall are really all about one thing: protecting the legal rights of LGBTQ families and especially the children in those families. As a second generation queer spawn, this is really close to my heart. I did not grow up in a situation where anyone's legal rights were in contest. My parent came out when I was much older, or actually was outed to me when I was much older. But for so many people in our community, this is a real and present threat. We actually just had a History of Collage panel a few days ago, and a lot of the original and founding members of Collage were recalling how this period of time feels a lot more like the 70s and the 80s than it did even just 10 years ago. Despite these challenges, there are so many different ways for you to legally protect your family and take action to change the status quo. But before we get to all of that, here's Shannon Minter from NCLR to talk about our updates to the aforementioned FAQ we created in response to the Dobbs decision last year.
Yeah, so hey everyone, it's so great to be here, and I just want to give a shout out to Amanda and Braden from GLAD for orchestrating this and getting us all technologically set up. That's been awesome. So I have the pleasure of talking about something positive. As we all know, our community has suffered so many setbacks, essentially been under attack by red states and right-wing politicians over the past 2 years. I mean, we're here tonight in part because of that, to remind us all that we are once again, as Jordan just said, facing a somewhat hostile legal environment. And it's so important we take steps to protect our families. But in the middle of all this bad news, something truly wonderful happened. And that's the passage of a federal law called the Respect for Marriage Act, which ensures that the federal government in every state in this country must respect the marriages of same-sex couples and treat those marriages equally under the law. I mean, the story behind this law is seriously just remarkable. So on June 24th, about 2 years ago, 2020, 3 years ago, the U.S. Supreme Court issued that devastating decision in Dobbs, in which the court, for the first time in history, eliminated a fundamental constitutional right that it previously had recognized, holding that contrary to its prior rulings in Roe and other decisions, there is no constitutionally protected right to reproductive freedom in this country. So in addition to just its devastating impact on women and trans and non-binary people, the reasoning of Dobbs cast doubt on the whole doctrine of fundamental rights. The majority opinion in Dobbs went out of its way to say that, hey, don't worry, you should not understand this opinion to cast doubt on any other fundamental right. But as Jordan just alluded to, Justice Thomas's concurring opinion just openly said that the reasoning and opinion in Dobbs should in fact lead the court to reverse Obergefell and other fundamental rights decisions. So, I mean, given the radical nature of the current court and its complete disregard for civil liberties and civil freedoms, I mean, we knew it would be really foolish to just take for granted that or assume that the court wouldn't possibly reverse Obergefell at some point in the future. So, in what was just a really remarkably focused and well-coordinated political effort that included both Democrats and supportive Republicans, that was brilliantly led by Senator Tammy Baldwin, the Respect for Marriage Act was passed by both houses of Congress and signed into law by President Biden in December 2022, barely more than 6 months after the decision in Dobbs. I think I messed up a minute ago and said Dobbs was 2020. Sorry, y'all, I barely know with so much going on what year it is. Dobbs was 2022. So barely more than 6 months later, the Respect for Marriage Act was signed into law. And I can just say, after working in this movement for 20 years, I never in my life have I seen such a masterfully executed effort or such an important piece of federal legislation. You know, it's so hard to pass federal laws passed in record time. And I just want to give a shout out to my esteemed colleague, Mary Bonato from GLAD, Polly's colleague, who did heroic work in helping to draft that bill and make sure that we were protected. So the Respect for Marriage Act, it does two things. It requires both states and the federal government to respect existing and future marriages of same-sex couples. It repeals the Defense of Marriage Act and does just the opposite of what that terrible law did. It requires the federal government to respect any marriage of a same-sex couple that's valid where entered. It requires every single state to give full faith and credit to any marriage validly entered in another state. And then second, it requires that both states and the federal government treat these marriages equally, giving them the same, package of rights, benefits, protections as any other valid marriage. You all, this is huge. I mean, remarkable. I still can't believe it happened, and just the level of rock solid security that gives us about this one issue. We got a lot of other, we still have a good ways to go, securing full equality and protection for all of our families, marital and non-marital. There's a lot of non-marital families we need to protect. But because of the Respect for Marriage Act, we can at least rest secure that marriage equality will remain the law of the land. No state, federal government can refuse to honor the marriages of same-sex couples or to treat them unequally. So that's probably the last happy note you're going to hear. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Meg York from Family Equality.
Thanks, Shannon. And not true, because I'm going to tell you about all the things you can do to protect your parent-child relationship. So it's going to be positive too. So my name is Meg York. I am a lawyer and director of LGBTQ plus family law and policy at Family Equality. As most of us here know, we form LGBTQ plus families in a variety of ways. That could be through assisted reproduction using donor gametes, through surrogacy, through the foster adoption from the child welfare system, private adoption, blended families. And really at the heart of all of that, no matter how you form your family, and considering everything that Jordan just shared, we must ensure that our parent-child relationships are legally established and protected. And that's what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about tonight. Since 2015, when marriage equality happened nationwide, and now even with the Respect for Marriage Act, we've seen a little bit of confusion regarding when the legal parent-child relationship happens. Now that we have marriage, we can be on the birth certificate, and there's an assumption sometimes that because you're on the birth certificate, you're a legal parent. The birth certificate reflects a presumption of parentage, but it does not itself establish a legal parent-child relationship. Now, don't get me wrong, it's great that we're on the birth certificate. It helps us navigate day-to-day life. It's an important part of recognizing our families, and it feels good. It feels validating. But it's important to keep in mind that a presumption can be vulnerable. For at least some period of time, it could be rebutted or challenged. And so we're urging people to take additional steps to ensure that your legal parent-child relationship is established and protected. And this is true even if you're married or even if you're automatically a parent under state law, like some non-gestational parents are in their particular states. Again, that's also great. So why do you need to do it? Why do you need to take these extra steps to ensure that legal parent-child relationship? Well, one is because there's still some vulnerability. If you move outside of the state or travel and the relationship breaks down or one person passes away. And then also, as we all know, LGBTQ people and LGBTQ parents still face discrimination. Establishing a legal parent-child relationship also ensures access to numerous protections, rights and responsibilities, educational decision-making, healthcare decision-making, benefits, inheritance, custody, security, stability, permanency. There are so many things that flow from that legal parent-child relationship. So how do you do it, right? Well, it's going to vary because family law is typically a state law issue. So it's going to vary state to state. Finding a local attorney in your state can really help you understand what the processes are or what your options are in your state. And a good starting point to find an attorney is the Family Law Institute. They maintain an interactive website that's a collaboration between the LGBTQ plus bar and NCLR. So that's a really good starting point for finding somebody who knows your state law and can help you through that process. So there are a few different ways to establish that legal parent-child relationship. The one that most of us know about, or at least know something about, is adoption. Adoption can really serve two purposes, right? It can help you create your family, and it can provide legal confirmation for existing families. So it can help you create your family through adopting from the foster adopt through the child welfare system or through private adoption. And for families that are already in existence, we're looking for legal confirmation of our parent-child relationships, and we can get that through adoption. Sometimes that's called a step-parent adoption, a second parent or co-parent adoption, or a confirmatory adoption. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about each of those. So step-parent adoption is essentially what it sounds like, right? It's adding another parent on as a legal parent. That makes a lot of sense, right? When you have a blended family, you're bringing somebody in. The terminology can feel a little ill-fitting when you already are a parent to your child. But it's a really important thing to access for married couples because at the end of the day, you end up with that adoption decree. And that's really what matters, is establishing that legal parent-child relationship. So don't let the terminology turn you off. That's one of the names of the process. And it offers a lot of protection. In addition to being called step-parent adoption, even for married people, some places still call it second-parent adoption or co-parent and confirmatory. That's really going to depend on your state and what the processes are in your state. Oftentimes, though, when you hear lots of people talk about second-parent or co-parent adoption, we're typically referring to options that are available to unmarried couples. And unfortunately, that's a little more limited than step-parent adoption, which is universally available for married couples. Second parent, co-parent adoption is available currently in 20 states, 1 territory, and DC. But unmarried couples can also sometimes use the VAP process or voluntary acknowledgement of parentage, and I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit after this too. We now also have something called confirmatory adoption, and that's really this streamlined process for same-sex couples or other families, mostly those who use assisted reproduction. That language feels more appropriate, right? We're confirming the family that already exists. In the parentage report, it says that that's available in 6 states. We've all alluded to this parentage report. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that parentage report in just a second too. But I have to say that it's now available in 8 states due to the incredible work of Crozier and our friends at GLAD. So, and Polly's going to share with you a little bit more about those strides when she speaks in just a moment. The important thing is that you're going to want to consult with an attorney to know what the options are in your state, what the differences are in the processes, and to help you navigate what those processes are and decide what's best for you and your family. Adoption orders are final, and they're recognized across the US under the US Constitution's full faith and credit clause. So that means that no matter what the future holds, a valid adoption decree offers tried and true protection. Also, in other countries, people know what adoption is, and they know what it means. In addition to adoption, in some states, you can also obtain a parentage judgment, and that's going to establish that legal parent-child relationship as well. So some states have updated their laws to reflect the different types of ways that we make our families. And there are various ways in those states to establish that legal parent-child relationship. It can be through assisted reproduction, through surrogacy, through something called de facto parentage, which means when somebody takes on a permanent role as a parent, and a few other ways as well. In some states, you can get these judgments or these orders even before a child is born. Sometimes those are called a pre-birth order. Like adoptions, they result in court orders that must be recognized across the United States. And a third way that you can establish a legal parent-child relationship is through something called a voluntary acknowledgement of parentage, or so we refer to that sometimes as a VAP. Again, might have a slightly different name depending on what state you're in, but they're very similar. It's a newer option for same-sex couples, but it's been a long-standing option for different sex couples. It's a really simple form. You don't need an attorney. You usually sign it, have it witnessed, file it with your Department of Health. And once it's fully and finally executed, it has the effect of a court judgment. So it's available in 11 states currently for same-sex couples, and federal law says that these should be recognized across the United States. We have some information about VAP specifically on our website. I know GLAD does too, so you can take a look at those websites and learn a little bit more about which states they're available in and what the processes are there. But at the end of the day, and really in light of everything that Jordan said, don't assume everything will be fine, but do know that a few extra steps can go a long way for your family's security. So take those extra steps and protect your family. And as we've all alluded to earlier today too, please do take a look at the parentage report. That was a collaborative effort by Movement Advancement Project with Naomi and a lot of us here today. And it really provides a lot of great information and expands on everything that I've shared here tonight. And with that, I will pass it over to Polly Crozier, Director of Family Advocacy at GLBTQ Legal Advocates and Defenders.
Thank you so much, Meg, for outlining the ways that people can protect their children. It's so important for people to understand how the tools for protecting their families and to take action to make sure that their kids are protected no matter what. I just want to acknowledge, I think it feels like a really scary time for LGBTQ families, right? It's people are afraid to go to their children's school. That's out people. Right. There are state courts in Oklahoma, and thank you to NCLR for leading on that litigation, in Pennsylvania and other states that have stripped LGBTQ parents of their marital presumption. And it feels like, we feel vulnerable. And I just want to acknowledge that. And I'm just so grateful for the folks on this webinar who've shown you some of the tools to protect your family. And I want to show you talk a little bit about the advocacy work that's happening, because I think we're all working a lot on defense, but there is a lot of really positive work that's happening across the country. And I think there are ways for you as a family, as an individual, to get connected to the community and to be part of that positive change. So I just will share a few of those points. GLAD is working on this, but so is every group in this webinar, and also so many groups locally, right? I think there really are a lot of people out there in the world who so deeply support LGBTQ families and so want you to know that they've got your back, and it's not always obvious, but they're there. So one category of advocacy I want folks to be aware of is what we call parentage reform legislation. Right. So there are many efforts underway in states to pass legislation to protect children's legal parent-child relationships, no matter how children are born, i.e. through assisted reproduction or surrogacy, or the marital status of their parents, the gender identity or sexual orientation of their parents. And comprehensive parentage equality legislation has passed in a number of states in recent years, including Connecticut, Rhode Island, Colorado, Washington State, Maine, and Vermont, just to name a few. Some protections actually passed in Nevada this past session. Unfortunately, they were vetoed by the governor, but we'll be back at that again, and grateful for the advocates in Nevada doing that work. And in states with active legislation, there's really often coalitions, including organizations and families and individuals who are working together to share stories, reach out to legislators, and testify before the legislature. And it's so important to get hooked up with those efforts, and to the extent that it feels safe and something your family can do, to participate and share your story and be part of that change. Because really every voice matters in the state legislature. And it's really incumbent upon all of us to grab all the allies, grab all your friends, and speak up for the community that you want and the laws that you need. And I want to share one effort that's happening right now in Massachusetts, which, folks always say Massachusetts so progressive. We've been working for a very long time to pass updated parentage protections in Massachusetts. I'm confident we're going to do it, but it's been a very long haul. In the Massachusetts Parentage Act is a wonderful coalition of so many organizations and families. The link will go into the chat for the coalition. Please, if you're in Massachusetts, have connections to Massachusetts, join us in this work. It's really a wonderful group of people. And another type of legislation that folks are working on is confirmatory adoption legislation. Meg spoke so wonderfully about what confirmatory adoption is, and we're working in states to make sure that confirmatory adoption is accessible to more people, right? So that if for people who are already parents to their children, who've planned so carefully to build their families, to make sure they can get access to the security of an adoption decree with as few barriers and expense as possible. Because we know it's so hard, there's for confirmatory adoption, people shouldn't be waiting 6 months. They shouldn't have to hire a lawyer. They shouldn't have to go through a home study or do notice to gamete donors. So this is a process to try to streamline that so you can get protections for your children as easily as possible. California, Colorado, Maryland, New Jersey, New Hampshire, and Virginia already have access to confirmatory adoption. And I'm super excited to say in just this past week, Rhode Island and Maine also passed confirmatory adoption bills. Maine's is awaiting signature by the governor, but we're feeling good about that. So I think these are really kind of exciting statutes. They pass in a number of states, and sometimes if a state isn't able to do comprehensive parentage reform, they're able to do an adoption process and a bill that is easier and more streamlined for families. So it can be kind of an incremental step to greater change. Another legislative effort happening in states is advocacy for expanded access to fertility health care. As you all probably know, access to fertility health care is relatively limited in the United States, right? Only about 14 states have comprehensive access to fertility health care, like coverage for IVF. And even in those states, it's only for private health care, private insurance. And so it doesn't cover people who are on Medicaid. And it often requires LGBTQ families to have to jump through additional hoops, right, to get access to healthcare. And for some, like gay men who might want to use surrogacy, they're not able to get coverage. So another effort we're working on is to say, how can we expand access to fertility healthcare for everybody, right? Because family building and making sure that people can have the families that they so very much want to nurture in the next generation, we want to make sure people have access to healthcare. A comprehensive fertility healthcare bill passed in Maine in 2022 that was explicitly inclusive of LGBTQ people. And I understand that DC also just recently passed a fertility health insurance bill that also included Medicaid coverage. And those of you who might be living in Vermont and Connecticut, there are bills that were filed this past session that will continue on next session with coalitions. Those are led by Resolve New England. So opportunities to get engaged there. And I'm sure there'll be other opportunities which you can connect with through these organizations. But just to say, there's a lot of work happening to make sure that our families can access the healthcare coverage that we need to build our families. And I think it's really positive and really generative, and again, intersectional with other movements as well, particularly the reproductive justice movement. And I think beyond legislation, there's other ways to get involved, because obviously we know there's a lot of states where legislation just isn't possible at this point. Obviously, there's a lot happening in local school committees, right? Book bans, curriculum issues, anti-trans policies, and advocating for protective policies in schools, working to make sure that your community members understand the stakes involved. And really, I was at a school board committee meeting earlier this week, like showing up and sharing your story and sharing your voice can really have a positive impact in shifting your community to better policies for your local schools. So I think it's a great way to try to be engaged. And also forming and connecting with local grassroots groups, right? One example of that is in Michigan, the grassroots group, the Michigan Fertility Alliance. working, all volunteer patient advocates who are working to repeal the surrogacy ban in Michigan, and is a wonderful grassroots group that encourages community members to connect with them. And finally, finding community together, right? Attending events, finding our joy as families, and reminding our kids that we are just a phenomenal community of so much fun and rainbows. And attending events hosted by COLAGE, by Family Equality, by local organizations and Pride's, beyond Pride, but there are groups out there who are bringing people together every month of the year and finding that time to connect in a safe space with our families. Because sometimes connection is all we need. So in any event, those are just a few ways that we hope that folks will get connected, get engaged, and remember that there is really hope. And with our collective work, we can make really significant change. And I'm going to pass it back to Naomi for some Q&A.
Great, thanks, Polly, and thank you all, Meg, Shannon, Jordan, and Polly, for such an informative and very condensed explanation of everything that's happening. So we received many questions when folks registered and also during the webinar tonight. As a reminder, feel free to type questions into the Q&A box in your Zoom. And we're going to try to answer as many as we can. We have a good chunk of time left. And we'll also be sharing out some resources that are mentioned with the recording. So I'm just going to throw it open to some of the questions that we received. I'll let whomever would like to jump in kind of take them. But the first one is, what recommendations do you have for LGBTQ families when it comes to estate planning? So beyond parentage and thinking more about kind of that whole wraparound estate planning piece.
Well, I'm happy to jump in as a former estate planner. So I used to have a private practice, a small LGBTQ firm that did estate planning and family law. And I will say, particularly for folks who are living in states where the laws might not be great, estate planning is a great tool. It's open to everyone, right? Sometimes there's obviously expense involved, although some of the forms can be like a healthcare proxy are often so straightforward, you can print them offline. But I will say there's a lot of estate planning documents that people can use to try to create the protections, like who do I want to make healthcare decisions for me, right? I want my partner to do that. And that can be done through a healthcare proxy. Or I want my partner to make financial decisions for me in case I can't. It's a durable power of attorney. There's wills, right? To say, who do I want to have guardianship of my children in case I'm not around, right? If I'm the legal parent. And you can nominate someone to be a guardian of your children, your partner or somebody else that you choose. So I think, that estate planning is a really good tool that is available to everybody, right? Regardless of marital status, regardless of LGBTQ protections, to find a competent person, hopefully LGBTQ sensitive, again, probably located through, GLAD's intake referral service or FLI, NCLR, the LGBTQ Bar Association. Find a good estate planner in your state to provide those protections for you. Or like a legal clinic at the law school in your state, because I think it's a really great tool to plan ahead for your family.
Thanks, Polly. So related, sort of when traveling, what recommendations do you have for LGBTQ families? What documents should we be traveling with to ensure that we're protected regardless of where we go?
I can take that. So that's a great question. One thing that I think that's important to do when you travel is to look at what is the climate like for LGBTQ people in the place where you're going. What are the laws? And not even just the laws. What's the culture? What's happening there? So you get a sense of what you're facing with your family and where. And maybe think about which places you feel comfortable going. Then when you do go, carry the paperwork with you. Carry that paperwork that shows that you have that legal relationship with the child, that legal parent-child relationship. So don't just travel with the birth certificate. Again, like I said, that's great, but also travel with those court documents or the VAP paperwork if you've established it that way. You can start by creating a little envelope, right? These are my travel documents, and you can put them in your safe or put them wherever you keep your passports and have them all ready to go that you can just pull out and take with you. I also because I'm a lawyer and we're trained to be extra cautious, like to scan everything and have copies of everything electronically as well. So I have copies on copies, and I always have that paperwork with me. I always urge people to travel with that paperwork. if you have the additional paperwork that Polly was talking about, possibly bringing that as well. You just want to show that all of those connections that you've worked so hard to not just create, but to legally establish, that you have that in your hand. So that's what I would recommend.
Great, thanks, Meg. So we have a question here from someone who says, my spouse and co-parent is transgender and I'm a transgender parent. Do you have any additional recommendations for us to protect our children and our parent-child relationship?
I'll try, but I might need Polly and a Meg to back me up here. As a transgender parent myself, so I'm a transgender man, and been married for about 20 years now, and my wife and I have now a grown daughter, but yeah, it does create kind of its own wrinkles being transgender. I think though fundamentally though just need to do the same things that other same-sex couples or LGBT parent and spouses do to protect their relationship and their family relationships. So all the extra stuff to make sure, just in case. I still worry honestly that if I passed away before my wife, would the federal government, would there be any issue with my Social Security benefits, that kind of thing? Under current federal law, there should not be. But it doesn't hurt for any of us to take the extra steps of making sure that we have wills, making sure that we have all the documents that Polly just talked about, to say who you want to make medical decisions for you. It should automatically be your spouse, but shoot, it surely doesn't hurt to have that piece of paper confirming that and saying that. And so that if the hospital, I live in a red state, I would not trust a hospital around where I live to necessarily respect my marriage. So having like that medical or the legal document saying that I want this person to make medical decisions for me is definitely a good idea. And one big thing that hopefully coming through tonight is that none of us really should be taking our parental status for granted. And if there's anything that we can do to formalize it, as opposed to just relying on, well, we were married when we had this child, we should do it if you possibly can. Just go ahead and get a court order confirming that you're a legal parent, or an adoption decree, or something that formalizes it if you possibly can. So what else am I missing for transgender folks, Polly and Med?
I think you got it, Shannon, like 100%. Yeah. And and just to add to that, I think we do have to realize, right, that not everybody can hire a lawyer, right? Like not everybody can do, but hopefully there are resources out there, like let's take VAPs, for example, right? A VAP that in 11 states you can sign at birth without a lawyer, and it's really helpful, right? Some people feel like they want an adoption because it's an adoption decree that provides a sense of like more familiarity, right? For other folks, and that's great too, right? But I would say get what you can get. Get what you can get. Get it all if you can, but get what you can get.
Absolutely. And I also think, when we talk about our identities and we talk about the types of discrimination that we may face, we understand that there are multiple layers to discrimination. And for people who identify as trans, that's one more thing that that people can discriminate against them about, whether it's trans, whether it's being BIPOC, whether it's being LGBTQ, whether it's any of these things. And so we know that people will use those pieces of our identities against us. And so what we're doing is we're building up those extra layers of protection that say, no, you can't.
Great, thank you all. So we received a question from someone. It sounds like perhaps they are pregnant or their partner or spouse is pregnant, and they're wondering what can they do sort of before their child is born, and what happens if something does happen to the person who's giving birth, and what happens to that other parent.
Does it? Okay. I would say, first of all, congratulations and good luck. And second of all, I think you know, back in the day when I was in private practice, I would say to the extent that you're able to, you can meet with a lawyer, you know, as soon as you feel comfortable in your pregnancy, right? Try to find somebody in your state who really knows this and really understand, you know, what are the different paths I have to protect my child. Some of those paths you might be able to start working on before birth, right? Like for an adoption, for example, you might be able to do all the paperwork. And then when the baby's born, you could do the last little bit, get your birth certificate, and then can file that in court. So oftentimes it's much easier before your child's born, because we all know what those early days are like. They're not easy, to try to do as much of that work in advance of birth as possible. And then I think obviously, you know, for when the worst happens, if the worst happens, and sorry to say the worst does happen sometimes, that is why I think estate planning documents can be very important, right? To make sure that you have a healthcare proxy about decision making, you have a will in place, so that if something happens, there's guidance for who's making the decisions. And that, you know, if you're gonna, you know, try to find a hospital that you know was going to respect your family, because those happens. I mean, I talk to clients quite often, and they're like, "Gosh, I had a bad tour at this hospital." Well, then you don't go to that hospital, right? You find a provider who you know, you can find that will respect your family and respect LGBTQ people and give you the respect that you deserve. So I think it's a lot of things. I think there is quite a bit you can do in advance. Someone want to add to that?
I would add too that if you're looking to establish parentage through an alternate route, so like we've talked about, are available in some states, whether it's the VAP, whether it's a pre-birth birth order, you can complete that paperwork and file it ahead of birth as well. Those rights don't vest until the child's born, because there's not a parent-child relationship until there's a child. And so, but at the same time, that is additional work that you can do ahead of time to shore that up. Again, if you're looking at what's happening with something with a pregnant person, I would echo Polly to say that paperwork about healthcare proxies, durable powers of attorney, I think that can be really critical. A lot of times we think about estate planning as something down the line, but it's really good to take care of that ahead of time. As you know, we don't want to be taking care of those issues when there's an emergency. We want them done and ready to go.
Great, thank you all. So I know, Meg, you mentioned that parentage laws are sort of the purview of the states, but I'm wondering if any of you, we got a question about like, what can the Biden administration and or Congress do to help protect our families?
Naomi, are you directing that question at me?
I mean, anyone is welcome to take that one. You know, what are you all in your organizations, you know, working on at the federal level that could help LGBTQ families?
Well, I think one thing I will start by saying is what Shannon talked about earlier this evening. You know, that was a piece of federal legislation that had a huge impact on our families and on our security to each other. And so there are things that can be done at the federal level. Most family law really is a state by state issue, but that doesn't preclude you from getting involved. If anything, I think it gives you a better seat at the table because it's a smaller group, right? You are there and you can talk to your representatives, you can talk to your senators, you can get on board and get some of these action alerts from the organizations. You can find out what the organizations are working on and add your voice to those efforts as well.
And we're mostly talking tonight about like family formation and that kind of thing, but there is the flip side of it, which we actually should mention, which is the intrusion of state governments into families through the child welfare system, through allegations of abuse or neglect. That system is broken, folks. It is a terrible, terrible system. It harms so many families, particularly families of color. The problem is kids being taken away from their families when there is no justification for that. It is probably one of the most serious human rights abuses happening in this country, with devastating impact on poor families and disproportionately families of color, but also on LGBTQ parent families. There's research, one research study found that the group of parents who are the most vulnerable to having their children wrongfully taken away by the state are single Black lesbian mothers. So there's problems, big problem, really big problems. NCLR actually supports essentially abolishing the child welfare system because it is so broken and causes so much harm. But the Biden administration, you know, they do, HHS does all kinds of stuff that affects how child welfare systems operate. And they are, you know, aware of these issues. And we and others, everybody on this call, pushing them to do more to address the horrific abuses that are happening in that system against our families and against lots of other families.
Yes, and to echo that, doing something about those specific things, you know, just like Shannon talked about, we have what's going on in the child welfare system. We have the John Lewis Every Child Deserves a Family Act that talks about how every child should have access to people who want to care for them, regardless of their sexual orientation, and that sexual orientation shouldn't be used to discriminate against people who want to care for children. There's the Equality Act, there's the IVF preemption bill, there's the Women's Health Protection Act. So there are things going on at the federal level as well that protect and that can help our families.
I just had to chime in on the child welfare system comments that Shannon made to say, yeah, +1 to that. I think that moving back to the state level, I think that's one of the animating reasons why parentage reform is so incredibly important. And, you know, in Massachusetts, there are so many people in our coalition who have lost their children to the, you know, have been vulnerable to the child welfare system because of a lack of clarity in the parentage laws, right? And if they had been not LGBTQ, it would have been clear that they were a parent and their child would not have gone into foster care. So I think it's a really under-addressed issue in our community, and, you know, a lot of pain and suffering is happening that is so unnecessary. And so just so grateful for everybody who are lifting that up and, you know, doing what we can to make sure that, you know, the child welfare system is not tearing our families apart, tearing any family apart.
Yeah, I want to echo everything that's been said so far. I can't really get into details, but we're fielding comments from a lot of families who are dealing with this exact issue and have children who have gone through COLAGE programming or participate in online programming. And the stories are really sobering. And the number of stories that's increasing every year is really alarming. And so I know that my position might be a little different here, but I really would like to see more done. I feel like there's a lot more bully pulpit work that could be done from the Biden administration. I feel like federal agencies could be doing a lot more to compel, especially states that are anti-LGBTQ, into relaxing a little bit, for lack of a legal term. I'm not a lawyer. You might have noticed by the lack of my input on these legal questions. So I just want to say anecdotally, even straight children with LGBTQ parents are really negatively impacted by all of the things that are going on nationwide, especially the bans on saying gay and trans in schools. If you live in one of those states, I don't have to tell you as a parent how that's impacting you, but it's not lost on us, the children, what is going on, and it really does have a huge impact. And so in as much as you're looking for parenting groups, in as much as you're looking for support from other LGBTQ parents, please make sure that your kids are also getting that same level of support and that they're also building community with people who have the same experiences as them.
Lauren, I just want to say I'm so glad you're on this call, and that perspective that you're bringing is absolutely critical. And it actually scares me to hear that you are hearing from your members that people, I mean, I know this is true, but it's very chilling to hear you say that. I just want to quickly share, like we had a case where we represented a mom with 3 kids, one of whom was just gender nonconforming, her youngest child. And we most people don't have, it's hard to, you know, they can't afford attorneys and all that. We were literally involved from the trial court level, NCLR and a big firm representing this mom. And the only thing she was accused of was supporting her gender nonconforming child. And she was accused of like forcing the child to identify as female, just the usual ridiculous stuff. We lost. She had all 3 kids taken away from her. And then we appealed all 3 kids just because of this one allegation about this one kid. And then we appealed to the Michigan Court of Appeals. We lost again. And we were in the process of appealing to the Michigan Supreme Court. I will say the Michigan Supreme Court did immediately intervene and return the 2 kids to her, but I don't know what was going to happen. But we were able to reach out to the Michigan Attorney General, newly elected, who was very good, who intervened and was like, what do you stop tormenting this family? But I just share that this is so real, you all. It's so real what happens to like you said, Jordan, even straight parents with trans or queer kids, vice versa. All configurations of our community are really vulnerable.
A really chilling story, Shannon. Thank you for sharing it. And I wonder, to all of you, what can all of us do to help support LGBTQ parents and their children in the current climate? What recommendations do you have?
I know that I just spoke, but since it's a non-legal question, I'll jump in and say we would love to hear just what joy you're experiencing. Share your stories about issues that you're going through. Yes, it does help strengthen our advocacy, and you could be a really important voice in all of the different states where we are advocating on behalf of the rights and privileges for LGBTQ couples and their children. However, it's really nice to also hear nice things. I'm really looking forward to Family Week next month and just being in an insular community with people who are not going to be asking obtrusive or invasive questions. We're really just going to be focused on uplifting one another and having a good time. And that's more of what we need right now. So share your joy. And I would also say, if you are in any type of position of power where you can have influence and impact the lives of other people, whether that's, leading an employee resource group, or if you are the boss somewhere, check in with your folks and really make sure that those who are queer, have queer families, are okay. I really think that in this moment, what I've appreciated the most is just casual, how are you doing conversations. Those have been really meaningful and really helpful. And so hold on to that joy, spread that joy, happy Pride, and let's not forget what makes us so wonderful and fabulous in the first place, despite a lot of folks trying to drown out our light.
That's wonderful, Jordan. Thank you so much. So we have time for just a few more questions. So if you have any more questions, please put them into the chat. I'm going to pull another one out of the hat. We had a question here about how families with more than 2 parents can protect themselves.
That's such a great question, and really a really important question, and I think a really evolving question, right? I think the exciting part of our families is that we like to challenge systems and find ways to thrive and succeed and protect ourselves. So I think again, it kind of depends on what state you're in, right? I think some states do allow for the protection of more than 2 parents through judicial action or through an adoption, right? There are those states that specifically allow that, like let's take California, for example. And like Massachusetts has done 4-parent adoptions, right? There are states that have the ability to secure more than 2 parents. And then I think for the other places, there's a lot to be said for kind of more, consulting a lawyer and trying to come up with a more informal agreement between the people who are parenting the child, to like a parenting agreement, right? To put some intentionality behind there and really, of course, always put the child first, right? But to put down some guardrails for if the relationships falter, to make sure that the child maintains a relationship with the people that the child knows as their parent, right? I think that's, should be the goal for our families, is to not use a lack of legal protections against each other ever, right? Because children don't know what protects, children don't know anything about the law. They know who they love. So I would say, yeah, it depends on your state. Talk to a lawyer who works with LGBTQ families and multi-parent families for protections, and try to do the private planning that you can to protect your children.
Thanks, Polly. I wanted to ask another question we got, which is, for folks who are just starting to think about kind of starting a family or just starting down that family formation path, what resources can you all suggest to help them navigate their journey, both with sort of emotional and logistical pieces and also the legal pieces?
Well, I think that there's a lot of our websites have resources, and we're adding to those resources all the time. We're constantly updating them and providing new information and new resources for people to really find them at any point of their journey. I know through Family Equality, we also have some peer support groups that we have that are available. We have a bi-weekly Trying to Conceive support group. We have a once a month parenting support group for those early days of parenting when you really need somebody there. And we have a bi-weekly group for trans, gender nonconforming, and gender non-binary folks so that they can meet together. So really finding that those places of support, the people who have information. You know, we have all gone through these journeys. We've all had those moments of, I don't even know what this process is called. I don't even know what this is. What are you talking about? IUI, ICI, I don't know. I don't know any of these acronyms. TTC, I didn't know any of them. And so where I learned some of those was through people who had gone through the process themselves and who could help educate me and help support me in that process. And thankfully, you know, a lot of these organizations, Family Equality included, we have that information up. We have those groups that you can join and all of that you can be a part of as well.
Great, thanks, Meg. So we received a question sort of about the interplay between state non-discrimination laws and parentage laws. So the question was in the context of the example you shared, Shannon, of the Michigan case. You know, and here in Michigan, I'm really thankful that we recently passed non-discrimination protections through the legislature after a very long time of trying. And would that new law, the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act has been amended, would that have offered protection to this mom? And how does that fit with trying to get things like confirmatory adoption and these other options available in states like Michigan?
You know, that's a great question. And I'm interested what everyone thinks about this. I would say not like directly, like we wouldn't have been able to like directly invoke that law and say, back off state. There's this, you know, non-discrimination law that protects this mom because they're alleging that the mother is, you know, harming her child. It's the same thing we used to hear in custody cases that mothers were causing their children to be gay. So now it's as though no one remembers history, and now this comes up. No one would say that now. Well, I don't think you would hear that now in a custody case, that the mom should lose custody because she's making the child be gay. You used to hear it all the time, but oh my gosh, we hear it over and over again, even in blue states, that if there's a trans kid and there's a custody battle, the other parent, often a father, will say that it's the mother making this child be transgender, forcing the child to be transgender. Utterly ludicrous, of course, but it is a very potent, you know, allegation, and judges still don't know enough to not take that credibly, unfortunately, and we have to rebut that through expert testimony and all that. So anyway, you know, they're claiming, the state was claiming the Michigan case that this mom was individually doing something wrong. But that said, it would definitely help. It would definitely help to be able to say, look, it's the public policy of this state as reflected in the anti-discrimination law, not to discriminate against transgender people. That includes gender non-conforming kids. Like you're off base. It would have been helpful. It would have been like a slam dunk or direct defense, but definitely helpful. And just shows all these different pieces of legislation are so critical and so necessary to create kind of a web of policy and protections. But I don't know if anybody else has a thought on that question.
No, thank you so much, Shannon. So in the few minutes that we have left, I'd love each of you to say, you know, what is your most important takeaway from tonight's town hall that you want people to walk away from? And maybe Polly, we'll let you kick it off.
Oh my gosh. I'm like feeling super grateful for all the wonderful people in this Zoom room and in the communities that I work in and that we all work in, who are fighting so hard for not just LGBTQ people, but for everybody. So like all keep hope. That's my takeaway. And this has been generative for me. So thanks.
I'll go. My biggest takeaway is that despite how many barriers there are and how many attacks there may be, marginalized people generally always find a way. And there are several ways here that you can take advantage of to protect yourself, to protect your family and the legal relationships in your family, and hopefully future-proof whatever may happen in the next few years. But I would definitely do it sooner rather than later.
Absolutely. As many people have acknowledged here, it's a scary time, right? That's real, right? That feeling of fear, that feeling of uncertainty, that's real. And I want to validate that feeling here. If anybody's feeling like that, you know, it's here. But like Polly said, there's hope, right? There's hope. We can keep fighting, we can keep working together, and we can take advantage of the laws that currently exist to protect our family. They are right there, and we just need to take them. And so my hope for you all today would be to feel empowered that that injustice exists, but we can take those steps and we can protect our families, and nobody can take that away from us. So I hope that you feel empowered to do that.
Totally agree with all of that. Yes, look, you all, our movement is one of the most successful like human rights movements in all of human history. And we've accomplished so much in such a short amount of time. When we focus, when we pull together as a community, we can accomplish miracles. We really can. So I know we didn't see this coming, these current setbacks. We're going to be fine. We got to get our feet back under us and focus. We're already doing that. And I'm 1,000% confident we're going to come out of this stronger than ever. And I really mean that from the bottom of my heart.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us tonight. As a reminder, we'll be sharing a recording of tonight's webinar along with lots of the resources. And I know I learned so much from you, Jordan and Shannon and Meg and Polly, and this sort of ending piece just has me feeling really full and optimistic. And I'm really thankful for all that each of you do within your organizations for families like mine and families like represented those on the call tonight. So I wish everyone a happy and safe last few days of Pride and a great summer. And thank you all and good night.